When the blue of the night meets the gold of the day, someone waits for me.
Hello, welcome to Crosby Conversations, a podcast discussing the life and career of the one and only Bing Crosby. Today, our guest is Malcolm Macfarlane, editor of the International Club Crosby's Bing magazine. How are you doing today, Malcolm?
Not too badly. Plodding on. We've had a reasonable day. It's been very wet last few days, but today's been dry, so it's cheered us all up a bit.
Well, it's about the opposite here. It's been warm the past few days, and later on today, it's going to be wet.
Yes. Strange weather for April over here, but still.
Well, we're supposed to get snow tomorrow night here in Iowa.
All right. Well, I'm in Wilmslow in Cheshire, and normally this time in April it's becoming quite nice, but it's cold at night and it's raining a lot, so we're not very pleased with the weather at the moment. Perhaps it'll buck up for the coronation on May the 6th.
Hopefully. Just as a little icebreaker, that'll probably start off with each guest on this podcast, since this is our inaugural podcast. What got you interested in Bing in the first place?
Well, in the late 1950s, it gives you an idea of my age. In the late 1950s, I was a typical teenager, like pop music and all the rest. You couldn't hear much pop music on the BBC. You had to listen to a commercial station called Radio Luxembourg. And the signal was weak, it came and went. But still, I listened to it. And there was a quarter of an hour show called Bing Crosby Sings in the middle of all this pop music. And I suppose it went in a bit like osmosis. I was taking in Bing Crosby. And also, I had an uncle who, if I went to visit him, he'd dig out all his old 78s from the cellar and he'd play me some Bing. So I was becoming aware of Bing. But when I went to the cinema to see, it was a Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis film, but the film on with it was Bing in Blue Skies. And from then, I was a fan. I really became a very keen fan. I started work, and the man on the next desk was a Crosby fan, and he came back one day. He bought an LP, Bing's Buddy and Bows, Buddies and Bows. It was Bing's duets with various people, and I was so impressed by it, I went out and bought it myself, and was blown away by it. And then also, I bought the first copy of the musical autobiography. They issued it, rather than the whole set. I bought the first LP. They issued that and the second LPs separately. So I was able to buy that first LP. So then I was committed. Every weekend I'd be out looking for old 78s at markets and the like, and so on. And it grew. Fortunately, my girlfriend put up with my obsession, if you like, although she was a Sinatra fan, and she's had to put up for the last 50 odd years as well. So I'm very lucky. But I suppose, when you're starting work, you're busy, you get married, you have children, your career, you put a lot of effort into that. So hobbies have to wait a little bit. And I suppose it was it would be in the 70s. We had a newspaper advert that Bing Crosby was going to be at the Palladium. And I said, I should have to go because Bing's TV appearances had been nothing wonderful, but I thought I've got to go and see Bing Crosby live at the Palladium. And this was in April when we saw the advert. And my wife was pregnant with twins. And the twins were going to be delivered around the time of Bing's Palladium concert. And she said, well, book a ticket, just go on your own. And we lived in Nottingham, 120 miles away from London. And twins being twins, they came early. So I took time off from work in Nottingham to look after my wife, make tea for all the visitors, all that kind of stuff, and help out generally. My first day back at work in Nottingham was the day that Bing was going to open his concert at the Palladium. So I went into work that morning, and everyone's fussing around me and saying about the twins and all that. So I said to my boss, would you mind if I left a little earlier today? He said, oh, no, you get off, because he assumed I was going home to help out with the twins. And I ran down to the station, jumped on a train. Fortunately, everything was on time. And I got to the Palladium in time. And it's quite a buzz in the Palladium. Bing Crosby was going to come out on that stage. No one has seen him live for years and years and years. And a lot of people, older people there, really very excited. Then the lights went down and the curtains pulled back, and there was a screen on the stage. And they started the show newsreel of Bing opening the United Services Club in 1944. And he came on the screen, and we all applauded and shouted, right? And he sang San Fernando Valley on the newsreel. And we all applauded that. And the screen lifted, and on walked Bing Crosby with the Blue of the Night playing. And what a moment. I tell you, the hair on the back of my head went, and everyone was on their feet. A tremendous moment. Bing Crosby walking on the stage. And you heard the LP, you know all the songs. But initially, he was a little cautious. And then he started to warm up. And it really was a tremendous show. And it was a very hot summer. Temperature in the theatre must have been in the 90s. Unbelievably hot. And he, as you know, he was on stage 2.5 hours, hardly a break, and we were all blown away. And then, of course, we came to the medley. And in that first show, it was a longer medley, more songs in it. And, of course, we all joined in, and as you heard on the LP, which was recorded a couple of nights later, and then finished with That's What Life Is All About. Oh, what an evening. Absolutely fantastic. And following that, I thought, well, I've got to join the Bing Crosby fan club. I wasn't very keen on fan clubs. You know, you think you get some strange, weirdo is not the right word, but obsessives.
There's a somewhat stigma with fan clubs when you first join it, with any fan club.
Yeah. Anyway, I thought, well, I've enjoyed that concert so much, I'd like to know more. So I wrote off the LPs that were coming out then. They gave details of Reg Bristow, the International Crosby Circle, who was the secretary, and someone else called Leslie Gaylor, who lived on the Isle of Wight and was a Crosby fanatic. So I wrote off to Reg Bristow, and I didn't get a reply. Time passed. So in the end, I didn't know he'd broken his leg at the time. He was out of action. I then wrote to Leslie Gaylor. And Leslie Gaylor wrote to me and told me there's a meeting coming off in Leeds. It's coming Sunday. You need to ring Michael Crampton. Here's the number. So at the time, we were moving house, and the house we were having built wasn't ready. So we were living in rented accommodation and no phone. So I remember going out to a telephone box and telephoning Michael Crampton, who was so welcoming. And I said, could I come? He said, yes, you'll be amongst friends. And I've always remembered that phrase, amongst friends. And I went along, it was about quite a long trip, probably 3 or 4 hour drive to get there. We were in Lincolnshire, and we had to drive to Leeds in Yorkshire. And, well, I did, my wife didn't come with me. And again, they made me very welcome, and they were all lovely people. And suddenly I discovered how much more there was to the Crosby world. It's like knowledge. You think you know all your knowledge, then you find there's all this outside the circle that you knew. And all the LPs that were on offer there, I never heard of them. I bought a number. One was a set of Philco shows. I knew nothing about the radio shows really. So that was the start of it. I joined the club. That was in 1979. I went to that meeting, and I stayed a member for 10 years, just an ordinary member, going to the meeting each year. And then in 1989, Reg Bristow I mentioned, he died. And Michael Clampton pulled five of us together and said, look, the club could fold up here because Reg Bristow did everything. He typed
Yeah.
it, he printed it, he posted it. He wrote most of the articles. It's a one-man band. So we formed a little committee. And I said, well, we've got to have a leader because it's hopeless, a committee. We've got to have a leader. So my pal Ken Crosby, who's a bright guy, very bright guy. I said, you want to be editor, Ken? So he accepted. I said, I'll be your assistant. I'll help you. So for the next 3 years, we muddled along, slowly getting it into shape. And then in 1983, he handed over to me, and I've been editor ever since. So there you are. Hey, I've talked long enough, John. Tell me.
I'll give
Tell me.
I'll give a little bit of my story just so it's kind of a, first episode introduction to me as well. Ours kind of mirrors each other's in some way because I kind of had a bit of osmosis to Bing during like throughout my very early years. Some of my first memories, I was sitting there watching a VHS tape is an intro to the Disney Mickey and the Beanstalk VHS tape, and it had in the intro is showing off because they showed it like sold it in like the individual like just 30-minute packages, a trailer to um Legend of Sleepy Hollow. And what's stuck in my mind is the Ichabod, Ichabod Crane. So like that's one of my first memories. So of course, then a couple years later, I remember his version of Frosty the Snowman sticking out of my mind when we were putting up Christmas decorations. And then, good 2016, 2017, maybe, I was looking into music, like trying to find music that I liked. Because up until that point, the only music I listened to was video game music. Because there's some great stuff. There's like with the games I was like Mario Galaxy, it's like a full orchestrated soundtrack and it's really quite good music, but it's like that's very limited stuff. It's not even on like streaming services to listen to. I could only listen to it if I pulled up YouTube, and you can't really download YouTube without paying. So I was just like, I need to find some regular music. And so then I look into it. I look into of course I had heard a bunch of modern music, not really to my taste. My parents listened to a lot of country and classic rock, not really to my taste. Tried the Beatles, nothing. Elvis, even Frank Sinatra, who I grew to like afterward, but nothing. And then it came to Christmas of whatever year that was, and there's a 30-song compilation on Amazon Prime that had Bing Christmas songs. It's just a compilation, kind of a truncated Voice of Christmas collection. And I was like, yeah, I remember this guy. I'll listen to this album, not even thinking much of it because besides just knowing, good Christmas music. And his duet with Peggy Lee on Little Jack Frost Get Lost was something that stuck out to me and made me want to look into his music more. Then for the next like year after that, I'd like sneak watching videos of Bing on YouTube because it felt like illegal to be watching something so old just because, I was a younger kid and it just felt very strange. And then that Christmas I got is Christmas of 2018. I got a couple of Christmas CDs of both Bing, Frank Perry, and that's kind of where it started. And then January of 2019, I bought the Gary Gittins Volume 2. I don't know why I went with Volume 2 and not Volume 1, but I got that. They had the DVD set that Universal put out around the time of the American Masters documentary. That was great set with almost a good chunk of his movies, like good 20 of them or so. I think 24 from the 30s, 40s. And I bought that set along with a 2-disc compilation that it's one of the like public domain ones, so it's not the best like compilation out there. But it had one song specifically, "Stranger in Paradise." That one stuck out and solidified me being a fan of Bing. The rest of the songs out there on there were good. Like the duets with Gary that were on there. There's like When You and I Were Young, Maggie Blues, and a good couple of others. Those stood out to me as well. The duets were always a standout. But I never liked Apple for the Teacher, at least at the time, which surprised me, which is on the record as well. But thankfully there was only one Christmas song on it, Only White Christmas, so it wasn't filled with Christmas songs. Is a good bunch. There's a couple tracks from High Society, Only True Love, and Well Did You Ever, which kind of disappoints me because I feel like I Love You Samantha is one of Bing's best performances, like of a movie song.
Yeah, yeah,
But so that kind of solidified, and then over the course, I got a record player in March. First records I got the 45 like extended play set of musical autobiography that is on eBay, which had like everything. It even had the key. The key doesn't work, but it it even has inside a little postage like slip, pink postage slip saying to like write back for like feedback or something. Um, and then Seasons, which was one of the like first albums of Bing I liked, is Seasons and the Bing Sings the Sinatra Songbook
yes,
uh, compilation. And
yes.
then I started getting into some of the other singers. Sinatra was the first one, but he's kind of went down my rankings. My top three are Bing, obviously, then Perry Como, Nat King Cole, and then uh, Frank and Tony Bennett are kind of interchangeable.
Yeah,
Depends
yeah,
on the day.
yeah. Well, excellent taste. So your favourite period of being, I think you said was 75 to 77, wasn't it?
It's well with my favorite period, it's like the 30s are favorite, the 50s and the 70s. The 40s, there's some good stuff for the 40s, except especially the second half of the decade, which I enjoy because it's about the same kind of sound of especially that first half of the 50s. Um, but specifically the first half, which is a very interesting decade, especially with all the war stuff with Bing. Like it's a like especially it just shows what he's like as a person, just going out there and doing all the stuff for the war effort. But just the recordings, he was doing too much where I feel like a good chunk of the recordings somewhat suffered. Sometimes it worked out in the favor of the recording, like I'll Be Seeing You, which
Yeah,
I
yes.
know there's been some criticism, like I think in Gary Gins's book mentioning how like it's like with some of the breath control and stuff in it, it's just not the best, but I feel like that almost adds to it, adds to more like the heartbreaking quality of the record. But
Yeah, I
then
agree. Yeah, I agree.
the flip
That's,
side of that is Night and Day, which is kind of
is, I, not very good at all. I agree.
yeah. But
Yeah,
then, I do like his interpretations of Night and Day, like when you have the uh what is it? Uh the Crosby Archive radio releases. Like that's a good uh version of Night and Day and Begin the
yes,
Begin.
yes, yes. Yeah, yes, they're better than the originals, aren't they? They're the General Electric ones, aren't they? General Electric radio shows.
And this part I'm gonna cut out real quick, but it's saying that I have a remaining meeting time of 10 minutes, so what I'll probably do is stop the meeting and then we'll just restart and act like nothing happened, just so we
Okay,
can go a
right.
little longer for a podcast. Because
Yes,
I don't know why it limits the meeting time. I didn't even see that.
yeah.
Anyway,
My
back to the show.
favourite period of things is 1938 to 42. He could still hit the high notes. He had the power and some wonderful songs. I think that session in 1939 when he sang "My Island of Golden Dreams," he himself said he sang some good tones on that one. He picked that one out. It's not a well-known song, but he really does hit the notes in it very well, very powerfully.
Well, it's very telling too that it was a recording that Bing singled out because, he never really complimented himself, especially publicly, about any of his recordings.
No, no, that's
Well,
right.
in a similar session from the 30s that I find to be good. And usually I'm somewhat against the like re-recordings he did in the late 30s because I feel like especially the one that I lambast the most is Home on the Range, like the 1933 one compared to the 39 one. It
Yeah,
just not quite
yeah.
the same quality, but both of them have their own merits. But the session with Matty Madlock in I think 1939 on Stardust and Deep Purple, those two are just it was a blues serenade a part of that session. Do you remember?
Might have
I
been around that time, so
I grouped them together. I know that they're kind of a similar kind of feeling. Blues Serenade is another good one for that time.
mm,
I don't favor that period quite as much just because there are a bunch of good songs, but then there's a good chunk of ones that I find a bit more forgettable in comparison to some of the other eras. But when he had a good song, he knocked it out. Like I said, the re-recording of Stardust, like that's a template for Nat King Cole's later version, especially that opening. Gordon Jenkins must have taken some inspiration from that, like uh, majestic opening. And then
mm,
Deep Purple was really good. Um, of course, anytime he did the Hawaiian songs, he, he seemed to go above and beyond, which, some of the other material, he'd sometimes, you could tell, not all the time, and not nearly as much as like someone like, say, Sinatra, but sometimes you could tell he was a bit more, not quite as happy with the material. Like he'd still have fun with it, like Bebop Spoken Here. Like you could tell he was having fun, but that's a bit.
yeah, yes. Of course, he was so busy. I mean, he didn't get a chance to learn the songs properly. He had to. Time was limited. He had so many things on.
Mhm.
It's amazing what he fitted in
Yeah.
during his career.
Well, it always surprises me, like you look at some other like recordings from radio, and they didn't record those songs like I Thought About You, because he had that's one of my favorite of those craft radio recordings, and
Mm,
it just surprises me that I never got around to recording in studio, especially because it's a Johnny Mercer song, and
mm,
that is still around the time when they had a good like personal friendship before that more so became a professional one.
mm. Yeah, yeah. Yes, so there's so many great radio songs we never recorded. In fact, I've got a little article in the next magazine, songs that I wish Bing had recorded. I picked out songs he didn't sing on radio either. So I've called it Songs I Wish Bing Had Sung Sometime. It follows Jeremy Rose's article on the review of,
Songs I wish I had sung.
that's right, yeah, yeah. So it fits in nicely, really.
There's a good couple of songs that I wish Bing had sung it to any capacity. I'm thankful for some of the ones that exist. Well, at least he was known to sing at one time, like um, and maybe hopefully exists somewhere out there, like "Love Is Here to Stay." I wish that existed somewhere, but unless it's in the Crosby archives, I don't think it exists on the Rice tapes at all, which disappoints me
Um,
because I feel like he would have given a great interpretation to that. And of course, the recording of At Long Last Love, another standard from radio, like that's a good one that I did.
um, yeah, there's so much, isn't there, really?
Mm.
What about films? What are your favourite films of Bing's?
My favorite, well, my favorite movie of Bing's is just like both on the merit of the movie and just like it's became Country Girl because I love the soundtrack to Country Girl and just the performance he puts on in it is great. And then like of the traditional Crosby films, it'd have to be um I have to choose one from each decade because it's kind of hard to choose one. But Blue Skies is a standout from the 40s, and then from the 30s, it'd have to be uh which one is it that I'm thinking of? Here's My Heart.
All right, all right.
It has a great soundtrack for being, like
Yes, it does.
70 minutes.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And the 50s, Country Girl. What about High Society? Where does that come in?
High Society is a close one there too, and I've always been partial to Just For You. It's not the best like movie out of his career, but both the pairings with Jane Wyman stand out to me, and of course both Frank Capra movies do too.
Yes, yes,
And
yeah,
in the 60s, um, there's not as many movies in the 60s. As like performance-wise, my favorite performance of his in the 60s would have to be Stagecoach. I love how he plays Doc Boone, but it's not my favorite movie from the 60s. That'd be have to be Road to Hong Kong, which I
yeah,
know some people are more like don't like it as much as the early ones, and I can understand, especially with Dorothy Lamour being kind of reduced to a cameo role. But I I still really enjoy the movie because the banter between them it seems just to be the same as it was in earlier years, even if they don't have Dorothy Lamour there to play off of as much.
uh, tell you what I like from the 60s is High Time, which people perhaps don't rate, but it's a lovely film, nice
It
story, and
is.
a wonderful song, of course. Which, um, yeah, it's a nice film. The one I dislike is Say One for Me. That's late 50s. He should never have made that, I think.
I've never gotten around to watching that one. That's the one big movie I haven't watched of his starring roles. I've seen most of the other ones are like even for like, King of Jazz, I've watched the parts that he's in for those. But like Confessions of a Co-Ed, I've watched all the shorts except the missing Just an Echo.
Yes, yes.
But
I wonder if that'll ever turn up.
I don't know. I
Someone's
know,
supposed to someone's supposed to have half of it, but I don't know how true that is.
well, because I was searching online for the half of it that was out there and I could not see anything. But Say
No,
One for Me is the one I still have not gotten around to watching, especially after seeing it was on the list of 50 worst films of all time in like 1978.
that's right. Yes, that's a bit cruel, but it's not a great film. It's overlong and there's too much of other things rather than Bing and I don't know. But
Yeah.
it's nice songs. He puts them over well.
I couldn't care less as a favorite of mine from that soundtrack. Really an
Mm.
underrated song from the Van Heusen and Kahn team. Only got recorded once by Sinatra, which I don't even think it was released at the time, and of course Bing's version got released, which was nice. And of
Mm.
course the one where it's just him and Buddy Cole at the piano. That's a great recording.
Robin and the Seven Hoods. I remember going to see that at the cinema, and it was all right for about an hour. And then suddenly Bing Crosby appears, and the whole film suddenly became alive. Uh,
Yeah,
he had some great songs in that. And Mr. Booze blew us away at the time. And we like the one "Don't Be a Do Badder." That was a nice song. That was it. He made that film for me anyway, certainly.
he did for me as well. He was really good in it. Ron and the Seven Hoods was overlong, although Bing definitely made the last hour. That is on there.
Yes, absolutely.
And I got the soundtrack album on CD. The limited edition one is one of the first ones I got, just because it had everyone on there. And I had looked into it because I'm on the internet forum that the guy who remastered Steve Hoffman runs, and he told a story on there about like doing the album and how um the way Mr. Booz was recorded for the studio recording, there was no like one complete recording. There were so many snippets of takes because people were just cracking up and everything that had to go through, listen to like the original edit, compare it to the tapes, and meticulously edit it together. You can't hear the edits, but he used to know, like he would play it at like seminars he would do, and he'd point out like every single edit that he had to make to the song. It just, whew,
Wow, wow. Of course, I don't know whether you've read this article yet. Yes, it was in the last magazine. Now You Has Jazz, which they recorded for the High Society soundtrack. 16 takes to
yeah.
get it right. Amazing.
Well, you can tell the perfection in like their product. It's one of the best film recordings, one of the best performances on screen, just because simply, the Bing Louis Armstrong pairing, which was the first time we got to see it on film since Here Comes the Groom, and that was the first time.
That's right.
Makes you
That's
wonder
what.
if they would have gotten any chance to do it in Doctor Rhythm if Louis Armstrong's part had been cut.
Mm, mm. That Now You House Jazz, when it was first shown at the cinema over here, everyone applauded spontaneously at the end of that. And I used it in some of my talks on the cruise ships. And again, you get almost spontaneous applause. It's tremendous. People get carried away watching it.
Well, it's just there's such an electricity to the performance, especially the way it's staged. It feels like a live performance, even though it is, obviously just filmed on a studio set.
Yeah,
And then
yeah,
the
yeah,
whole High Society soundtrack is nice for Bing to get a Cole Porter soundtrack for a movie. Rogers and Hart soundtrack, Cole Porter, Irving Berlin.
yeah,
He got everyone.
yeah. Also, what I didn't realize for many years was that in Bing's films, he was lip syncing. I had no idea. I thought I never noticed any difference at all.
Well, he's
So he
so
was very
natural
good.
with it.
He was very good at that. Absolutely.
Well, then you watch the couple performances like in the Frank Capra films when he would have them do it like live on set. Like you don't really tell as much of a difference in like comparison to when he sings regularly, like well lip
No,
syncs to the other
that's right.
songs.
Mm,
Like just like sing a little song compared to in the cool of the evening. They're both very similar, but I'm pretty sure singing a little song was
yeah,
pre-recorded.
yeah, that's right. Yeah. I suppose they get better sound if they pre-record, don't they? It must be very difficult. Um, in when what was it? Sunshine Cake. How on earth they got the sound for that? I don't know because they're all over the place, aren't they? In that.
I don't know. It was definitely an enjoyable number.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I like the commercial recording too.
Mhm. I thankfully I had found the records. I had went to my local record store and one of the few Bing records that they have. It's like only three that I've seen that were there that I've gone from there. They had the uh Bing's Hollywood LP with that on there. So now I have three of them. I have the Blue Skies one, the one with Road to Rio on it, and
Mm,
then the one with Top of the Morning and all that.
yeah, yeah,
Um, and then they have Seasons there. Of course, I already had Seasons, so I'm leaving it there for someone else to discover and enjoy the
yeah,
album. And then
yes,
they had one of those the radio years that the LPs that the Bing Estate had done in conjunction in the 80s. One of those LPs, and I got it on CD a couple weeks later.
yes. So when did you get a record player? Had your parents got a record player?
They didn't have any record players. They had CDs, and so we had went on vacation in March of 2019, and I'd gotten a good bunch of spending money, so I could get souvenirs and stuff. I saved up that money and got record player and records. And I had gotten one of those like cheaper like Crosley ones that are like the um like suitcase looking ones. I got that for Christmas of 2018, but I got like a good quality one in 2019. But of course, Christmas 2018, my very first Bing vinyl I got it wasn't even him singing, it was the small one in the Happy Prince's a 10 inch,
Yeah,
the 10
yes.
inch Decca. And apparently there's another Bing record that my grandma had but went missing. And it really surprises me, but my great grandma did not have a lot of Bing. She had a good bunch of Frank Dean live music of that time period, and only one Bing 78, which was the Road to Utopia 78 with Welcome to My Dream and It's Anybody's Spring, which I have in my room now.
Yes. So you can play 78s on your record player. Have you got the right? Do you have to change needles, anything like that?
I haven't played it. The last time I played a 78 is on the Suitcase one. I played the first 78
Yeah.
I had gone,
Yeah.
which was a Liberace recording of White Christmas. And it didn't sound great, and I haven't played any of the 78 since. And of course, It's Anybody's Spring one. It's not in the best condition, but I had to, take it, have at least one Bing 78 in my collection.
Yes. Yeah.
Um, I have a good
Yeah.
couple of 45s beyond the musical autobiography set I found one of White Christmas in the store, which I felt like is kind of required to just have at least one White Christmas single, and that's about the only one I'll get unless I find like a 78 one out there somewhere. But
Yeah.
it's not one that I'll necessarily go looking for because it's such a song that I have way too many copies of it on CD and record already that don't need to go out and grab
I've only,
singles necessarily.
I've only got 178 left, and that is White Christmas. Uh, I've sold all my LPs some years ago now. I've got an awful lot of CDs, but mainly I use iTunes, put everything into iTunes,
That's what
and
I do too. I'll rip my
I've got
CDs and put them onto iTunes.
I've got two iPods, which one in the car, which plays not just being all kinds of people, and I've got another one in the house, so, uh, with all my favourites on.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well,
iTunes
the
is the
main
way.
reason I keep getting records is to put them onto iTunes because when I get them, I'll get like, the Crosby Anna series by Broadway Intermission. I'll
Mm,
find copies of that online, or like there was
yeah,
the Blue and Gold record that had some of the recording sessions for like Witchcraft, uh, Catch a Falling Star. I think that's what
yeah,
the GG.
that's right. Yeah,
So that's the main reason I keep getting records is if it's something rare where I find it locally.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm delighted you've still got a place where there are records to buy. Mind
Oh,
you,
there's a good couple places in town here.
yeah, it's become more popular over here. HMV, big store, which forgotten all about LPs some years ago, has now brought them all back, of course. And a lot of people are buying them. I'm sure they haven't got anything to play them on, but I think they like the artwork and all the rest.
Well, it's a nice thing beyond just the music because even if you can just stream the music, it's like, big artwork and of course like the liner notes. Liner notes have always been
Yeah,
something
yeah,
I've loved. Like, because there's a couple Bing archive releases from the 2010s that I have that I didn't really need to get because there'd only be like the Bing on Broadway one, for instance, that just had like a cockeyed optimist and it's only of Paper Moon. I can listen to those on streaming and I have the
mm,
rest on the Mosaic set, but I wanted to get the liner notes, so I got it. Plus, it
yeah,
completes the set basically. I just finally got the final one of that CD series, the Bing and Rosie duets disc, because I found out for like $10 online, which was a lot better than what I was seeing elsewhere.
yes. Be interesting to see what's on that Binganella one. Presumably, it's just the radio songs,
That's what it says on the
which we've all
post.
got.
It's nice to see them, well, which we do all have, but I'm thankful to see it, especially with the clip they showed of Basin Street Blues the other day. It's the highest quality I've heard it because those the swinging with Bing set, which it's nice to have, but especially compared to what both the archive releases and what Sepia did later with those radio show remasterings, it slightly pales in comparisons. Of course, the performances come through, but
Yeah,
so it's
yeah,
nice to see the Bing and Ella tracks get um a nice remastering, especially Basin Street Blues. I'm guessing Memphis Blues will be put on it as well because they've been repurposing a good track or two when they
mm,
can for the past releases, which I don't blame them necessarily, especially since this is the first one it's said to be fully remastered. So
mm,
it's costing a bit more money, I'm
mm.
guessing. but I look forward to it.
April the
Makes me wonder what
25th.
they'll, yeah, makes me wonder what they'll do for Bing's birthday since that's coming up here soon.
Mm.
Because with these monthly releases, it makes me think we could get a monthly release in May, but they might have some sort of announcement of some bigger plan. I don't know, but since they've been doing ones each month, it makes me hope anyway. More hope than I
Yeah.
had last year around the same time.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Yes, it's interesting to see how primary wave are going to go. Really, I mean, they've got to get $50 million back. It's an awful lot of streaming, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, they have
Anyway,
White Christmas each year to at least do that, and then the rest
yeah,
of it, it's nice to see them like, it's very nice. The Irish songbook, it wasn't that I was disappointed, it just, I more so, you can almost tell in the keeping track article for next magazine issue the excitement I had for a Valentine from Bing, where I didn't have to do nearly as much research into the tracks to find the versions compared to the
yeah,
Irish Songbook, where I had listened to it so many times, and even then,
yes,
by the time I had gotten my track listing worked out, uh, David Currington helped me out and corrected the couple things I got wrong. So then you'll just notice like a almost lack of enthusiasm for that second one. But so much, it reminds me of the old Crosby archive releases, just in the amount of release stuff. Especially Peg on My Heart, hearing that from the original tape sources sounds great.
mm, mm. So things are lively. When I first got interested in being, there was hardly anything, hardly any new issues. This is in the 60s, and Bing seemed to be a spent force. But here he is, back in the charts every year. It's wonderful.
Yeah. Well, it makes me one of the things I was thinking about asking you, after Bing had passed, what was it like with those the overdubs by Ken Barnes and Pete Moore when those released, hearing those basically like
Well,
new recordings.
yeah, we loved them. We loved them. It was the first LP put out. Can't remember the name of it now. That was the best. The second one wasn't quite so good. We didn't think.
I
Didn't
know
know
there was
some of
a
the
Songs
songs.
of a Lifetime. I don't remember what the second one was.
Yes, yeah. Ken Barnes did an awful lot for Bing, and he was a lovely fellow. Um,
And he kept the stuff going. I had just gotten the Memory CD the other day, which it is always just nice to see, the Crosby Circle's involvement in getting Universal to release those CDs during the 90s and early 2000s, and
mm,
seeing like Ken Barnes helping out with the Memory CD or like the Swinging with Bing. He always like was helping Bing's legacy, and of course I'm guessing he was part of the fan club. Of course I wasn't around
oh
during that
yes,
time, but like Ann Barnes still is.
yeah. Yes, Ken was an honorary member. He did an awful lot for Bing. He'd come to our meetings and talk, give us a talk, and so on. There was one meeting. I was supposed to interview him, and we sat at the front, and I asked my opening question, which I can't remember what it was. And then he didn't stop talking for another 45 minutes. I didn't have to ask another question. I just sat there paying attention. It was fascinating stuff, absolutely fascinating.
Well, it's always fascinating. I'm always interested in hearing the sessions, but you know, nothing compares to those sessions with like Barnes, because you can tell Bing was enjoying himself during those sessions, and
Yeah.
there's like a good rapport between the two of them. Like listening to those session sound bites on the United Artists CD, there's
Mm-hmm.
like the just especially the one with now this is on the Fred Astaire set, but with Fred and uh Bing, Fred and Ken Barnes and Harry Crosby.
Yeah. 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 Also, in that 75 to 77, he made that um, record with Decca, didn't he?
Yeah, it feels good, feels right.
It was good, which is one of my favorites of that period. I really like it. I know Ken Barnes was a bit dismissive of it. I think he didn't like the arrangements or something, but I like it. And Jeff Milne, a pal of mine, he's 98 now. He was the producer of it, and had some lovely stories about he had to demonstrate. Bing was unfamiliar with the song, so Jeff had to sing it to him, which is quite comical.
Well, it's like there's a similar story with Ken Barnes too that I remember. Feels Good, Feels Right has always been one. It more so disappointed me, but not for like just because I had always listened to those BBC sessions from a couple days before he died,
Yeah, yeah.
before I listened to the actual album, because that wasn't on streaming until last year, so it wasn't ever fully on YouTube. And then of course the songs he didn't sing on that, like I love Time on My Hands, that's one of my favorite. So that later period. The main thing I don't like about the album is just the mixing feels a bit dry,
All right.
especially on the CD. So it doesn't pay as much compliments to Bing's voice as like the Ken Barnes ones, but even then sometimes a bit too much reverb, I feel like. But Seasons and Southern Memoir and Bingo Viho, I'd say those are the three best, like just like mix wise of those layer recordings where it captures Bing's voice the best and the band and everything. I love
Yeah.
both Southern Memoir and Bingo Viho, even if they're not necessarily, especially in the case of Bingo Viho, it's kind of mixed reception from the fans because of a couple of those tracks. I love The Breeze and I from that album, but I know
Yeah.
a couple people like um, Fred Reynolds wasn't the biggest fan of that and Spanish Eyes when going through the Crosby collection.
No, the Spanish Eyes was a disappointment, really. It was we're used to the El Martino version, which is so easy to listen to. Bing had sung it in the same style. I think it would have been great, but he kind of ad libbed, didn't he? Really?
I still enjoy it, but you can tell that he wasn't the most familiar in the song. Like with the
No.
two takes that were released, there's so many like word differences that just you can tell is a bit more freelance. But it's also just the things I find interesting is you can tell as a passion project with that album because you had Amapola was recorded first time 1960 for Elson Bing. Then in one of the Long Island sessions, I forgot which one. Then again for Bingo V. So just, three times in the later part of his career. Same thing with Breeze and I. And then like Say CC. Actually, no, that's different, but Fancy Meeting You Here and Long Island's, but not on Bingo Viho. But he really liked those Latin songs.
Yeah, yeah. Of course, he was spending a lot of time in Mexico, wasn't he? I suppose he was hearing them all the time in Mexico when he was going down to his place in Las Cruces.
Yeah. And Southern Memoir, though, that's if it weren't for Seasons, that'd probably be my favorite album from those later years. It just so happens Sleigh Ride is slightly higher on my ranking than the Georgia on My Mind, but even then I still enjoy Georgia on My Mind a bit more just from the kind of mismatched
I like it. I think
style.
it's a
I like it.
lovely, lively version, but a lot of people criticize it, but I like it.
I like it. It's a bit humorous, but I really enjoy it just because it's one of the not older songs on there, but Hoagie Carmichael and Johnny Mercer, and it's given this somewhat funk treatment, which I still enjoy. It just, in fact, I like I was seeing stuff about like stuff with the stop chorus that was featured on the re-release of it. I even enjoy that part because even though it might not be the like the best, you can tell Bing's enjoying himself when he sings that just because, especially when it reaches back into the melody, there's just such a jubilant nature to it.
Yeah, yeah. I was just thinking, I mean, you're a young chap, but when Bing died, um, it was the television programs were interrupted here. The BBC interrupted their program mid-program at 10 to 9 to say Bing Crosby has died. we were quite staggered. BBC never, if the Queen had died, they'd have interrupted the program. But to do that for Bing was tremendous. And then the commercial stations got hold of it in their 10 o'clock news. And it was like we'd lost a relative. It really was. We were all shocked. I was shocked. And I remember the next day there was Teddy Johnson is a British singer. He got a record program. And of course, he was talking about Bing, losing Bing. And then he finished up with a song that I hadn't heard at the time, When I Leave the World Behind, the one, the Irving Berlin song from Feels Good, Feels Right. And we're almost in tears listening to that. It really was a tremendous shock. The newspapers here were full of all the long articles and about it. The impact was tremendous here. I think it was fairly big in the States, but I think in the UK, because he'd been over here at the Palladium, I suppose, very recently. I went to the second time at the Palladium. Didn't go to the opening night this time. Took my wife this time. Somebody else had to look after the twins. And it was a good show, but I did feel he'd lost some of that zest he had the year before, because falling off the stage didn't do him much good. But it was a very good show. The audiences didn't. He liked the audience to sing along. And Rosemary Clooney spoiled it for him in that second show, because she didn't like the audience to sing along. So she said that I want to sing this by myself. So we didn't dare sing along. Of course, when Bing came on to do the medley, where we normally sing along, we weren't singing along. I remember at one point he put his hand to his ear to encourage us, but we didn't let ourselves go. Rosemary Clooney had stopped us.
Well, it's funny. It reminds me, like, I've looked at some of the Perry Como concerts, especially. I always like looking at the tribute medley he did for Bing, because he'd usually give some sort of anecdote beforehand, and he'd always invite them to sing along. So it wouldn't surprise me if he heard the Palladium concert on vinyl, or even attended one of his concerts, and then kind of got inspired by that to invite the audience in to sing along after seeing how much they sang along to those medleys.
Yeah. Yes. Of course, I met Perry Como. Have you heard that story? I won't go through it again. His final concert in Dublin, the Christmas concert in the 1994 Christmas show, which he taped in January of that year. We went across to see it, and we got into the rehearsal. And he was on stage singing along Christmas song, can't remember which one it was. And we just sat there and watched for a bit. And then the musicians had to have a break. So everything stopped, and he came off the stage. So we went up to him, and he was very polite. Oh, hello, who are you? And we introduced ourselves, and we said, I have to tell you, we're Bing Crosby fans, really. And he laughed, because he's so am I. So he told his usual story about Bing and how he'd praised Bing in the medley, and Bing told him off, he shouldn't do that or something. And for 20 minutes, we had a lovely chat with him, and he was interested in us, where we'd come from and all that, and a lovely, nice, avuncular man. And then this girl, can't think of her name, this girl singer in the show came across and kind of spoiled the nice, friendly chat, really. Anyway, that was fine. Then we went back at night for the show, which, have you heard all about this last show we did?
I was I had to stop halfway through, but then going back into after a short break, going back into I Love You So, and then just erupting into applause.
Yeah, a wonderful moment. You know, I mean, it was a bit croaky in the first half, but we didn't care. It's a legend on stage. And then the interval went on and on and on. And President of Ireland was there, and we thought, well, must perhaps have a little reception for Perry to meet the president halfway through. Anyway, as we later found out, he decided he couldn't go on. Anyway, the, the manager told him, if you don't go on, you'll be sued for fortune. And then this girl singer, I should remember her name as soon as we end the chat, came on and said he's going to come on and have a go, so please be patient. And of course, when he gets to "And I Love You So" and hits the note, the emotion throughout that theatre was tremendous, tremendous. But then after that, he went a bit downhill, and in later years he got dementia, and perhaps it was coming on at that stage. I don't know, but it was a fantastic evening.
Yeah, the latest thing that I can find of him on YouTube is 1995 at a children's benefit, but that Irish concert was his last like big formal concert.
Yeah, yeah.
His voice stayed with him till the end, though.
Yes, it did.
I always when it's almost admittedly a bit the word I'm looking what's the word petty, just because it's not even that I have anything against Sinatra, but just with his legacy that sometimes I'll get a bit bitter with how he's held up in comparison to all the other ones who get overlooked. Yeah, it's just like comparing Sinatra, who's just like a couple of years off of Perry from around the same time, to Perry and how their voices like held up, especially in like the 1982 concert they did together.
At the White House.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Bing's voice held up surprisingly well. I mean, he changed so dramatically over the years, as we know.
Well, after like the main like shift in the mid 30s, though the like color of his voice changed when I was doing the research for the next article. June and January 1942, the key was shifted down a minor third. It stayed that way until his death when he sang it 4 seasons. Same key for, a good 35 years.
Yeah. Of course, you're a musician, and so Jeremy Rose is too. So the two of you can tell me about keys, and I'm lost really.
Well, it's more so just he's lowered it slightly for his range in 42 and then stayed that way till his death.
Yeah.
And with such a slight lowering, more so than anything, that's what gets me, that he was able to still do it to the full ability in 77. Especially it's nice to him to do the verse of that, which was disappointing when he didn't do it in the movie. That would have been nice to hear the movie recording with that. Thankfully, he did in the studio.
Yeah. So,
of course,
what's your next podcast going to be?
Well, I was gonna probably contact either see if Anton would be interested in one, get both of you on in a row, get the editors of Bing Magazine, have like a split up, your guys' Christmas podcast. See about Jeremy Rose, see if we can get a podcast in. David Labasco, because we've talked online some.
Do you know Greg Van Beek?
We've talked once, but I've never really emailed him once. I've just when we were searching for the Paul Anka Music My Way, where Bing sang like a snippet of My Way that I was looking for. I think you had forwarded me on to him, and that's the only time I've talked to him.
He'd be a good man to do a podcast with. Because
I'll have to look.
Of course, David Covington in Australia, that would be an interesting one for you.
Yeah. Of course, I've talked to Arnie Fogel on email, but try to think who else. Of course, with his health, probably not now, but I have especially earlier on before I joined the fan club when I was just on the Crosby fan world, I had some correspondence with Richard Baker.
Yes.
which he was
Yeah.
rather kind to me too. He sent me the Long Island tracks for the
Mm.
first time, which were just a joy to hear all those standards.
Yeah. Do you listen to Arnie Fogel's radio show?
I've listened to some of the Bing Shift. I love when I would hear a bit, which I never listened to the internet radio enough before it gotten like taken away to
Yeah.
hear much of the Bing's Basement. But just even the regular Bing Shift, it's nice to hear.
Oh, they're great shows.
That reminds me, there's a podcast which will be wrapping up here soon, but there's one going over Bing and Jack Mullen on the like development of the tape, and they hadn't like done the podcast with like the states of involvement, and they had interviews with like Mary Crosby and I don't remember who else, but they played snippets. They played a snippet of one of Bing's private recordings. I did the parody medleys, like remastered from the original tapes, and even a radio show fluff from the tape too. Like I think it was My Foolish Heart.
All right.
Is nice to hear some of that stuff, and it also just makes me think, like, because on one hand, when we were talking about Bing and Ella earlier, they might be freshly remastering those tracks, but it also makes
Yeah.
me wonder, especially hearing that they've had a lot of the stuff remastered and Universal have just been stalling releases.
Mm.
So it could easily be either one of those, but all I know is I look forward to whatever they have in store.
Mm. Mm. Right.
Well, I think I went through, well, you might answered most of the questions I was gonna ask you in your introduction of how you got interested in being in the first place. I was gonna ask you about being live in concert, and you took care of that on your own. It's
Sorry
nice
about
to see that.
that.
No, it's fine. It's nice to see that video that surfaced that Bing Crosby facts. Ava, she had put on
Yeah.
her
Yeah.
Instagram that is on YouTube of Bing and Rosemary in concert.
Yeah.
Um, but
Sorry about that. My
and
phone's going mad.
just the one last question to kind of end it off, that is, since we didn't never really touch on the fan club too much, how has it changed over the years?
Well, numbers are gradually dwindling because of old age and death and so on. Few new members coming in each year, but they don't keep up with those who are falling off their perch. So it's dwindled from its peak. I mean, at one time, well over 1,000. Now we're about 500. So it's dwindling, and most of our members are now in the USA. Um, the, the English ones are down to 150, perhaps something like that.
Well, it's still nice to see, especially after we had the magazine go back up to 56 pages
Yeah.
last year. That is nice to see, and I see donations from everyone, people involved with the Crosby estate, people just, regular fan club members, names that stick out basically. And I've seen that in there. It's just nice to see the fan club still getting a good chunk of support. I had just bought a magazine from 2017, the winter magazine. I bought a copy from uh, Perry, which was nice to see. And of course, we were talking about Bing's death earlier, and we got into another subject. I had found the memorial issue of Bing Gang around Bing's death that had just a bunch of articles from the time. It's nice just seeing all the
Mm.
continuing like fandom for Bing after all these years.
Mm. What amazes me is the number of people on social media. I mean, there's all these various sites on social media. It would be nice if the big three biggest could perhaps merge. That would make a lot of sense in my book, but it's up to the people running it as to what they
Yeah.
do.
It'd be nice to see. It's a little bit humorous to me though with the Facebook ones that there's, at least with the one Harry Lewis Bing Crosby fan page one. It's a different name, but then there's two, the Bing Crosby Appreciation Society and the Appreciation Group.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. Yeah. So why don't they merge?
But
Perhaps
yeah,
they'll listen to this podcast and think about it.
maybe
Uh,
maybe it'll be the next Club Crosby International Crosby Circle merger.
yeah, perhaps so. Yeah. Well,
Well,
thanks for setting this up, and really enjoyed our chat.
I enjoyed our chat too. It's nice to talk to you in person instead of over email.
Yes. Okay. All the best to you.
All the best to you too. We'll be publishing this podcast soon, and next time we'll have on a mystery guest, which we'll see then, because I wanted to see how this podcast would go first.
Yeah. Okay. Well, hope you
So
get
I'll
a good
see.
reception to it.
I hope we do too. Maybe this will be a tester one, see how people respond, and then we'll go from there.